was a popular study that was done with 5-year-olds over a span of a few decades. And what this was known was the marshmallow experiment. And what they did was they would bring in these 5-year-olds and all by themselves, and they would look at that 5-year-old and say, okay, I'm going to give you one marshmallow. But if you're willing to wait 5 minutes without eating that first marshmallow, we will come right back and give you a second marshmallow to eat. And so after the kid was left to himself, the kids would have an option to do what they want. After the adults left, sometimes some kids would run and they'd grab the marshmallow and they'd just eat the first one. They didn't care about the second one. And then there was another group of kids that they would just look at the marshmallow and they would try not paying attention to it, but after a few minutes they'd go and rush and eat the marshmallow. But then there was a third group of kids that would look at the marshmallow and they wanted to eat it, but they just did everything they could not to eat it. They'd sit on their hands, they would sing to them songs, they would fiddle with their fingers. But then when the 5 minutes came, the adults would come in and reward that child that waited and didn't eat their marshmallow and gave them an extra marshmallow. That's 100% profit for that kid. And all he had to do was wait 5 minutes. Now in the study, they were amazed at these kids, and so they studied the kids that were part of this study at 5 years of age through adulthood. And they recognized that those who had learned to be controlled enough not to eat that marshmallow in that 5 minutes did better in school, was more likely to graduate high school, more likely to graduate college, more likely not to indulge in drug or alcohol, and less likely to engage in premarital relations. And so they were amazed at this. And so simply put, they found out the whole key to their success in life was really their ability to have self-control. But then they looked at the other group of kids that ate the marshmallow in that span of 5 minutes, and they found the exact opposite results. They were less likely to graduate high school, less likely to go to college, more likely to engage in drug and alcohol, and more likely to have premarital relations. And so one of the things they were saying was, it's so amazing how self-control, self-discipline plays a role in our lives. I want you to do an exercise with me, because all my sermons, I always want you to always accept it with some kind of application, because everything I teach you, I want you to ask, how can I be more like Jesus? Because I don't want to just impress you or make you cry or laugh or whatever it may be. I want you to ask yourself, in reflection of everything I teach, how can I implement what is being taught to help me grow? And so in this teaching about self-control, I want you to always challenge yourself and reflect on what I'm teaching you, and reflect in regards to your own personal life. Now, I have an exercise I want you to do for a moment. I want you to take a few minutes, and this may be a little bit painful for you, but I want you to take a moment and think of the worst decisions or actions you've ever done in your life. I'm sure because they were the worst things you've ever done, a lot of them can come up really quickly in your mind. I want you to take a moment and think about those worst moments. Think of those worst decisions. Think of the worst things you've ever said to anybody. The worst things you've ever done to anybody. Dwell on that for a moment. And then after about thinking about that, I want to ask you the question. When you said the worst things you've ever said to someone, when you've done the worst things you've done to anyone, including yourself, or the worst decisions you've ever made, were you self-controlled in those moments? Because if you notice, most of the time when you do the worst things, make the worst decisions, or say the worst kind of things to people, you're not the most controlled person. Have you ever said something and angered someone that you wish you could just take back? Or you made a decision that at the time you were very impulsive, but because of how you were feeling and thinking at the time, you did it. And then you later look at that and say, I regret doing that. I wish I would have never done that. We all have those moments. No one's better than anyone in this circumstance. We've all lost control. But look at how essential control is in our lives. Here's the thing about our Christian walk. The Christian walk is difficult because God asks us to do something that is very difficult, and that is live lives of self-control. Because you cannot love God unless you have self-control in your life. Because how can you love God with your whole being if you can't even control your whole being? If you can't control your heart, if you can't control your mind, or your strength, or your soul, how can you offer up to God something that you don't have yourself? The whole basis of Christianity is having the self-control in our lives so that when we look to God, we can say, we give you full control. But if you lack self-control, you can't give to God something you don't have. That's why we have to have self-control. Because if we don't have self-control, let me tell you this, someone or something is controlling you. Something is always controlling you. It's either yourself and God or Satan in the world. And sometimes it's easy to deceive ourselves in this circumstance and say, well, I control myself. Or when bad things happen, what do we often say? I wish God would just take control of my life. Have you ever said that? Bad things happen and you're like, I just wish God would take control. And I say, do you really? Do you really want God to take control of your life? Because if God took control of your life, the way that you would think would be completely different. The way you would use your time and prioritize would be completely different. The way you treat others and how you value the things of this life would be completely different. So do you really want God to control your life? Because when we say, I give God control, or as Daniel led us in that last song, Lord, take control, do we mean that, or are we lying? But here's the amazing thing. When we give God control, we're trusting Him with our lives. We're trusting Him with our souls. And here's the amazing thing. God always does what is best for us. You see, God has created this idea of self-control because self-control creates boundaries. And within these boundaries, it's saying, I love you, I care for you, I protect you. And even if these boundaries seem harsh or seem to be difficult, I have them in place because I want you to be protected. I want you to do what is right. That is why we need self-control. Because God wants us to be like Him. He wants us to be protected. He wants us to grow. It's not hard to see that this world lacks control, does it? You turn on the TV, how much violence is going on? And why is that? Because people lack control. You see, you turn on any TV station, there's a lot of sexual immorality. Because people lack control. I mean, you can pick out anything in this world. And the fact is, this world is so disorderly. It lacks self-control. And that's why we can't think like the world, even though it's the popular way to think. But God is a God of self-control. God is a God that wants us to be self-controlled. And self-control is very difficult, isn't it? Because it requires to have a humility to reflect on who we are and where we're at and where we need to be. That takes honesty. It takes wisdom to say, I will do the right thing. I will consider the consequences of what I am going to do. It is something that requires perspective. It says, my worldview is completely shaped by Jesus Christ. I can have it shaped after anything. But is my thinking right? Or it could be one that requires selflessness. You know, when you have self-control, there's a lot of sacrifice. That's why people don't like self-control. Because you're sacrificing something. Like even when in the covenant of marriage, you're sacrificing the concept of forsaking all others and having that self-control, saying, I'm going to be faithful to you. In the same context with Jesus Christ, it's saying, I'm going to have the self-control to say, I am tempted by the things of this world. I'm tempted by sin. I'm tempted to live unholy. Yet I choose you because I love you more. It's saying, I control myself. That's why the Bible constantly tells us to control your bodies, not to engage the desires of the flesh, but actually glorify God. That's why the Bible talks about if we're going to really defend ourselves against Satan, it really requires self-control. Because we do not want to be controlled by Satan in the world. It's so difficult to have self-control, but it is something that we essentially need in our lives, because when you lack